And frankly, the thing about not being able to climb up the stairs and do what's expected of you when you get up the stairs, it's a bit sad and reminds us how old and sort of past it he is.
Every day at just after 9 a.m. here on Times Radio, we discuss the big stories of the morning with our panel. We're going to be saying hello to Guto Harri, the former Downing Street Director of Communications, and Becca Hutson, Editor-in-Chief at The News Movement.
So, here are some of the stories we've covered this morning on Times Radio Breakfast. Andy Burnham described the launch of Number 10 North as the best day of his life as he worked his first full day from the new Manchester base. He's continued his vibes-based social media presentation, posting a video of himself and the new Chancellor, John Healey, rating the best bar snacks. Professor Mark Sears, Director of the Policy Lab at University College London and friend of Burnham, says the lack of substance during his first week in charge wasn't anything to worry about.
It's an indicative first week rather than a big policy first week. So it's meant to be illustrating the primary priorities of the government rather than actually making huge, significant change. And again, I think the government will be pleased with how these policies seem to be polling at the moment. But as you say, the big decisions, the big amounts of money, the big changes are still to come.
From peanuts to power cuts, speaking to The Times, a whistleblower has revealed that the National Energy System operator NESO is flying blind because it can't accurately forecast supply from renewable sources. A leaked report warns that Britain's race to net zero will leave the country at greater risk of blackouts and higher electricity bills. A member of the National Preparedness Commission, Elizabeth Braw, explained why we should be concerned.
It is increasingly likely that somebody may want to disrupt them. I don't know that there is an answer to that. Yes, obviously monitoring has to be improved and the government should know where the energy is coming from and add new sources. But what if they were to, several of them or many of them, what if they were disrupted?
After the White House Correspondents Dinner was cut short in April when a gunman rushed security checkpoints at the venue, Donald Trump has taken to the stage at a rescheduled event. He gave a very long and wide-ranging speech, failing to land a few of the jokes aimed at members of the crowd. The correspondents. Katie Balls, Washington editor of The Times and The Sunday Times, was there and gave us this assessment of Donald Trump's performance.
This dinner has been cited by MAGA figures as an example of how incestuous DC is when it comes to the relationship with the media and politicians. So the very fact that this year he decided to speak it is interesting. But I think we saw in those jokes that he couldn't quite work out how to pitch it. We're all sat there thinking, has he just decided not to read the script?
We're going to ask Becca Hutson and Guto Harri, have we snookered ourselves with renewable energy? As Times columnist Janice Turner questions the wasteful water companies' hosepipe bans, should we scrap them? And how do you recover when your jokes fall flat?
But first, let's talk about Andy Burnham's first week and his skill as a salesman. He's talked a good game, becoming the first Prime Minister and First Lord of Vibes. But how long can he keep up the funny social media videos and good times chat? Guto, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very well. Let's start with, this is your area of expertise, how you make sure your message is delivered to the public. These videos, when he's chatting about ranking his favourite pub snacks, what use do they provide?
I think what he's done is he's changed the nature of the debate and he's just drawn a line under what was a dreary, well-trodden script, or well-read script, if you like, that politicians were out of touch, that they didn't know what the man and the woman in the street was going through. That had serious implications in terms of they don't know how hard life is, but also the sense that they're living on a different planet. And he's certainly counted one of those. He looks like a signed-up member of the human race, somebody you might want to bump into, somebody you might want to join and, have a debate about whether you're going to have scampi fries or my favourite would be, pork scratchings, certainly with a pint of ale in the north of England. So it serves a certain purpose, but it's important, but it's only part of the picture. And what I'm sure he's aware of, and certainly some of the clever people around him and behind him are aware of, is that it doesn't actually fill the whole gap. There is still a space, and it's the dominant space, where you need to be serious and grown up, and you don't just think, oh, I love the idea of, cancelling income tax. Wouldn't that land well? But there are people who'd say, well, do you know what the cost of that would be? And then you'd have to shut down the NHS and, social care and defence and send all the police force home. So if he does both, it's fine. And for the first week, I think it's totally understandable, forgivable, even desirable. But it's one to watch.
OK, before we say hello to Becca, I just want to play, for anyone who hasn't heard or seen this particular bit of video which has surfaced on social media. This is Andy Burnham and John Healey, his Chancellor of the Exchequer, talking about pub snacks.
If Twiglets come out of that bag, I've blown it. This is the best thing all week.
Bacon fries.
I'm not wild on these, so I'm kind of feeling all right with my choices now. I'm happy with them in fourth place, I think. You know what I mean?
If you smell them, neither smell or taste a patch on pork scratchings.
Agreed. Pork scratchings all the way.
Pork scratchings for me.
I'm pretty happy with those choices.
OK. This is the best meal I've had so far.
Cheers, John. We're pretty aligned. It's going to be a good partnership.
Look forward to it. Cheers.
Smell the fries, with the weird game show music going on behind it. Becca Hutson, good morning.
Good morning.
Are you buying what Andy Burnham is selling?
I kind of am, you know. I think every successful politician needs a bit. You know, we had Boris and the kind of messy blonde hair. Corbyn was the absolute boy until no one could stand him. You know, and Burnham has chosen being a kind of normal bloke from the north, and I think he's kind of leaning into it. And for lots of people, they didn't know who Andy Burnham was until quite recently. So I think these videos are a good way of introducing himself. And also a great way of kind of flooding the zone on social media with, you know, slightly inane puff pieces, you know, which is a great way of kind of controlling the message. So I think these are great, but Guto makes a great point that it can't be the sort of sum of the entire kind of comms strategy. And we do need a little bit more substance, and we do need to kind of, you know, the apocryphal black box shtick is probably going to get quite tired quite quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is surely a concern that they must be alert to, that the northern lad, or we're old school, let's talk about bacon fries and pork scratchings. It's if you veer into parody that quickly, or self-parody that quickly, you are in danger of becoming a joke.
Well, no, absolutely. And I would like to think that they're going to sort of follow up with these really fun videos about pork scratchings with, you know, how we're going to pay for the kind of week of giveaways that we've just lived through. But I think he's also borrowing kind of massively from the kind of Zoran Mamdani, who's the mayor of New York City's playbook, who uses social media in the most effective way I think we've ever seen. You know, this is a man who, you know, announces almost all of his major policy announcements, his progress, what he's up to on social media, and does it really well. And sure, sometimes he has some fun and references the Wu-Tang Clan, but there's also a lot of substance to what he delivers. And I think this idea that just because you're on TikTok it can't be serious reflects a kind of outmoded thinking. You know, and as Tracy Nelson said,
proud to be outmoded.
Guys, sorry, it's the future. You know, more people are on getting their news from social media than they are anywhere else, sadly. So, you know, being on there, understanding how those platforms work, and kind of having a nice media mix of, you know, serious stuff and pork scratchings is probably a very sensible comm strategy for 2026.
Yeah, Rebecca, your whole role is about kind of making sure young people see credible news online rather than fake news. Guto, if you were sort of in number 10 North and summarising, really, reviewing the week that's been in terms of the launch strategy, we've got sort of a very healthy helping of Andy Burnham's policies and personality. How do you think the strategy's paid off so far?
I think it's been a little bit chaotic, but when I walked into number 10, you know, people remind me, you know, I was a little bit chaotic as well. And it almost doesn't matter. What they needed to do was to convince us that there genuinely has been a change, because nobody was happy with what we had. And they've done it by a show not tell. If they'd spent all week, like Gordon Brown did when he took over from Tony Blair, you know, 1,000 years ago, this has changed, this has changed, this has changed, and people see the same guy who's been there for ages, it doesn't feel like change. This feels like change. This feels like a recasting of government, different personalities, different vibe. And yes, that opens up the tantalizing prospect of different policies, i.e., in the minds of all of us, psychologically wired that way, something better than what we've had. So on that basis, I think it's gone pretty well.
Yeah. Rebecca, what about you, if you were sort of giving an Andy Burnham report card of week one?
I would say 10 out of 10 for energy, 0 out of 10 for scrutiny, and probably 9 out of 10 for gimmicks. I think the sort of number 10 North door was probably veering on pastiche, wasn't it? But it absolutely reflects a total sea change in how we're doing politics. It's exactly what he promised he would do. I think it's optimistic, it's fun, and now we just need to kind of figure out how we're paying for it all. But that's the easy bit, right?
Yeah, we've just had a message in from Wendy, says Burnham's video is infuriating. We've not heard policies from him yet, but we have heard a few this week. But yeah, he's had time to opine on his favourite pub snack, socks with sandals. He's not serious. He acts like he's just one pop idol.
This is the sort of person that I think Labour should be worried about losing if he's going to be doing all this guff. But then we know we've got some serious stuff coming next week with the announcement on social care. So we will keep a close eye on it. Let's move on, as we've got a lot to talk about this morning. And this is a very serious story. A whistleblower has told The Times that the national grid operator is, quote, flying blind because it cannot accurately forecast supply from renewable sources. A report disclosed to The Times reveals the National Energy System Operator, known as NESO, cannot accurately model the modern power system at the same time as the government pursues a drive towards renewable energy sources. And the reason is because the modern power system has so many different energy sources, renewable sources, including on a very micro level, people's individual homes putting money back into the grid, is something that the monitoring system has not caught up with. So has the rush to net zero left us helpless in the face of more immediate problems? I mean, Becca, this is a serious problem, isn't it? If the lights were in danger of switching off, as they did in Spain last year, then we've got this horribly wrong. This is a matter of national security.
It's absolutely incredibly serious, but I think we'd be wrong to sort of blame the energy source here. And actually, I think this is an argument for sort of faster, quicker and more investment in how we're going to manage a grid of kind of mixed energy sources. You know, this is not to do with using renewable sources. It's to do with a kind of outmoded forecasting and modelling system. And this isn't unique to renewable energy sources. We saw it happen, as you say, in Spain and in Portugal. Having kind of outdated technology is the problem. And I think we've got ourselves into this weird binary when it comes to energy policy, that it's either kind of drill baby drill and net zero is this kind of woke nonsense, or we can't go anywhere near our own kind of oil reserves and can't frack because we're all going to be living out of Hessian sacks. And I think actually what this shows is that we need a really smart transition policy where we continue to exploit our natural resources but also invest really heavily and far quicker than we are in a grid and technology to ensure that we can keep the lights on.
But it baffles me, Guto, that there hasn't been proper planning to keep up with the shift in the energy transition, to properly either monitor or model what's going to happen. Because, I mean, we've all seen, I'm sure you would have seen when your time in number 10, the disaster planning if something like a nationwide power cut happens. We have hospitals losing their electricity supply, we have transport networks going down and the like, and yet we were one moment away from losing power nationwide just last month.
Yeah, I mean, like Becca, I have a sort of alarm bell that rings in my head when I read something like this, because I imagine that the story's been placed by some petro head who wants to undermine the whole concept of renewable energy, as if we're going to be using oil and gas for the rest of our lives.
I do think Juliet Samuel, who was very much involved in this story, along with Ben Ellery and her colleague Emily Gosden, would push back against that. They've had whistleblowers coming out of the network itself saying we've got a problem here.
Yeah, and I have enormous respect for the journalists. I just think there's an agenda at the moment that's looking not from the journalist, but the whistleblower, for instance, that are trying to sort of use the disadvantages of an infrastructure that has not been updated as an argument against different sources of energy. They're two different things.
I take your point about
the sun.
That. Yeah.
We should be harnessing the wind.
Of course.
What we need is to move away from a system where, reading this, it sounds like there's an old man with an abacus there working out, the surges in supply and demand. And there's this thing called AI. Have they not heard of it? I mean, we have an AI minister sitting in cabinet now. He's a hugely talented guy. Everybody loves him, whatever their political persuasion. He's there at the heart of government. I hope he gets to grip with people like this and says the answer, this is not an argument for not using renewable energy. This is an argument for dragging you guys and women kicking and screaming into this century so that you actually use AI to accurately predict these things and do away with these scare stories that, are being used. However credible the journalist, they'll be used by others as an argument for drill, baby drill, and forget about windmills.
In one sense, I think they will. Rebecca, there's been a shift, hasn't there, towards much more negative conversations around net zero. If we look at the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch said, look, net zero by 2050 is just completely not possible. And she's really using net zero as a test.
Yeah.
People's views on net zero as to whether they could be Conservative candidates.
That was apparently behind a lot of the deselections,
to coming up in the next general election. Why do you think it's fallen out of maybe favour and fashion, net zero, Rebecca?
I think it's such a shame, isn't it? Because it has been sort of totally weaponised and it's sort of been hijacked as a kind of culture war. And like you say, now if you're sort of not kind of pro-fracking and want to sort of, drill the earth to its core, you're suddenly seen as a kind of, wokey leftist. Whereas, I'm old enough to remember when, David Cameron was, feeding huskies and, they were pledging to be, a green government. So I think it's a huge shame that we've let it be hijacked by sort of like the populist right. And now actually what is a sort of a crisis facing humanity and a crisis facing our planet is something that people think we can kind of opt in or out of. And the idea that it's being used to, decide who can be a Conservative or not, I think shows that Guto might need to look for a new party pretty soon.
Guto, what do you think about that? We're having this at the same time, this conversation at the same time. 200,000 people have just been evacuated, if you combine those in Spain and in France, because of intense wildfires, because of the heat. And we had a very wet winter, followed by an absolutely scorching hot summer, which is all being exacerbated by the changing planet.
Well, I'm unashamedly green, not a Zach Polanski, kind of open the borders and sort of bring communism in through the back door kind of green, but a true green who cares about the environment. But I also think that it's sound Conservative principle. Conservatives traditionally are custodians of a healthy environment, are custodians of things that they want to pass on to their children. They don't want their kids and their grandchildren to breathe dirty air. They're also, and this is what I saw as an opportunity, back then when Boris Johnson was mayor of London, he did the same. A man called Arnie Schwarzenegger had done the same in California. It's an opportunity to build new businesses. This is a new growth area. Conservatives traditionally like growth. Windmills are growth. Nuclear power stations are growth. Solar energy is growth. There's a reason why China, now has more energy from renewable or non-carbon sources than it does from carbon sources. Good old communist China is beating us at our own game.
That's a command economy, isn't it? I think the problem is that people didn't like the deadline because it made politicians try and rush headlong towards something without thinking about the unintended consequences, which are now on the front page of the Times. We're risking blackouts because we haven't sorted out the national grid in readiness for this transition. Anyway, we were going to have to change subject. I'm afraid. You are listening to Times Radio with Weekend Breakfast. Still to come with Guto and Becca. Is there no greater insult to British people than banning them from using a hose pipe? More on that. And how do you recover the room after a disastrous joke? Rosie, Wright and Nick Wallis here on Times Radio.
With Rebecca Hutson, Editor-in-Chief at the News Movement, and Guto Harri, the former Downing Street Director of Communications. Janice Turner writes in the Times today, the hosepipe ban doesn't wash with the angry public when water companies lose billions of litres and reward themselves for polluting rivers. Restrictions feel like an insult. Rebecca, are you with her there?
I think Janice Turner is the voice of the nation. I agree with nearly everything that she writes, which surprises me, actually. I think she's completely right on this. The breakdown of trust between the public and our water companies is deeply profound. And I can completely understand why people are loath not to water their gardens or spruce up their flower baskets when you see, sewage seeping into our public waters. We see them all walking home with, massive bonuses at the end of the year for seemingly not delivering a lot. But I actually think the most sort of pertinent line in her piece is about how, as a country, as a nation, we need to sort of reassess our relationship with water. We are now in relatively hot climate. These heat waves are no longer kind of extraordinary weather moments. They are becoming the norm. And so, like in other countries in Europe, we need to sort of treat our water with a little bit more sanctity. And potentially that does mean that you can't, sprinkle your lawn with water every Saturday. And instead, we do need to be more respectful. And if Guto Guto's, as keen as it sounds like he is for us to use AI at every opportunity, we also need to think about, the huge impact that has, in water supplies with the cooling that those data centres need. So I completely agree and understand why people are very annoyed they can't, water their gardens this weekend. But I think actually that bigger point about kind of a cultural shift is the really standout moment from her article.
Well, you can water it if you're prepared to fill up your watering can and then walk around the garden with it, which is what Janice is particularly not keen to do. She says to the water companies, you expect us to pay £600 a year, endure a dreary slate sky January, the fourth wettest winter on record, only to cut buckets around in August. This does, Guto, we've just been talking about the kind of warming weather, but this does pose many questions about this country's resilience and our infrastructure and why it is that I don't think we've built a new water reservoir in 30 years.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to again, because we should. It's like the energy thing. It's the management of resources. It's actually, finding a way of making sure that you can get energy that you produce when the sun shines or the wind blows to the places where people need it. At a time when the sun may have gone down and you need lights on at night. That is not beyond the wit of man. And I think what we have is incompetence that has been rife in the civil service and that has been rife in arm's length bodies in particular, and and within private companies. And sadly, I know that some management teams now in private water companies are doing the best to clear up the mess. But, the people who initially took charge of those companies cleaned them out. They took their dividends, they took the money, there's very little left, and they didn't invest. And now there's a really difficult situation where what you do, because the money isn't there, they're not actually milking the companies dry anymore. The money isn't there to do the investment that is needed, but it needs to be done. Otherwise, we keep getting this ridiculous situation where they're either really sort of wet and we've got a sodden lawn, or the lawn is going to wither and die.
Yeah, and all the parks right now just look so completely bleak. So yes, I think lots of us are longing for some sort of significant period of rain to come at some point in the next few days, weeks.
It's 27 minutes past 9. Last night, President Donald Trump made what sounds like something of an endurance test, an hour-long speech at the White House Correspondents Dinner. It's meant to be a light-hearted affair, and it's meant to involve a few gags. Here is how some of his efforts went down.
The other day, a senator I knew got a text, a great guy, from his wife. And she said, when you get home, I want to have you immediately come up the stairs and make love to me. And he said, I can't do both. You know what? You can't go up the stairs and make love. Does anybody get that? Well, I thought that was actually pretty good. That was actually the only thing I thought was good in this whole frickin' stupid speech that they wrote.
It's jaw-dropping, isn't it? It's Donald Trump. I'm talking to Becca Hutson and Guto Harri, who have been monitoring what's been coming out of DC overnight. Not just that clip, there was plenty more around, which I'm sure will be finding its way through to social media over the course of the next few hours. Guto, what do you make of what you heard?
It's so bad. When you have to explain your joke, which he essentially did, it's really not funny. And I think what he misses more than anything else is the funniest thing is to be sort of self-deprecating. And you cannot sort of confuse, though humour is a great tool, and I did work for a man called Boris Johnson who was, a consummate practitioner of this. It is a great tool for connecting with people and actually for putting down your opponents. But it's got to be really clever. I remember once Ian Blanford, God bless him, he was leader of the SNP in Westminster. He had a go about Boris about that infamous cake that was served in Downing Street on the day of his birthday. And Boris, just as an aside, said, the honourable gentleman looks like he's been eating more cake than me. And virtually everyone in the House of Commons laughed, on the SNP benches, all over Labour, they laughed, because it was funny. I've watched about half a dozen of these things last night. His attacks on opponents are really dreary, boring, ranty. He doesn't get it. And frankly, the thing about not being able to climb up the stairs and do what's expected of you when you get up the stairs, it's a bit sad and reminds us how old and sort of past it he is.
Yeah, you have to deploy jokes with real... I think in a speech, when it's crafted like that, you've got to be so clever about it. Rebecca, how do you recover when probably not giving a speech, or maybe you're at a dinner party, you say something and it just falls flat? Should you do a Donald Trump, try and explain it, push through?
Maybe I'm completely immune, but I don't think my jokes ever fall flat. So I was sort of struggling.
Confidence is a key part of telling a joke.
Yeah, I think you just have to sort of back yourself. And I think, the idea of then sort of explaining why it's funny and sort of breaking the fourth wall is where he went wrong. But I think actually when Donald Trump is unscripted is when he's at his funniest. So they probably should have just let him loose and given him some talking points rather than these sort of very tired and laboured pre-rehearsed lines. But I think he can be quite funny when he's sort of when we're all sort of least expecting it. So I was a bit disappointed in his performance last night. And those speechwriters, had a lot of time to prepare. So I think they could have come up with, to Guto's point, some slightly more self-effacing lines, which I think would have got the room laughing. But we should also remember there were a lot of kind of, Democrat supporting journalists in that room who probably weren't the most generous audience, which is also key to delivering a good joke, isn't it? You've got to have the audience with you.
Absolutely.
The whole thing is really weird, though, the White House Correspondents' Dinner. The whole idea that you've got these journalists who spend the rest of their year finding stories, and there are plenty of them around about Donald Trump, and then he's having to hand out awards to people who've won prizes for their reporting on him, and that kind of how the audience is meant to respond to a president where there is, you would hope, a good degree of professional distance between the two when he's trying to make these wisecracks. I mean, the whole thing, I just find it's odd. You wouldn't get it over here, would you?
Thankfully, you didn't have to go.
No,
Katie Balls
wasn't invited, weirdly.
And we are very grateful to her for joining us in the very small hours of her morning after the party a little bit later. Nick and Rebecca, thank you very much. Sorry, Guto.
Am I off?
Guto and Rebecca, well, thank you very much for being here.
I'll take it from here.
Yeah.
Guto Harri, former Downing Street Director of Communications. Thank you, Rebecca Hutson, Editor-in-Chief at The News Movement. It has been a pleasure.